Well, thank you, Jack. I mean, you guys are young. You know, we older folks, there's kind of like memory lane taking place for the last few minutes. But yeah, there's so many fascinating things for those of us who've been around for a while. But because it's a little somber, I have to tell you a joke. I wasn't going to tell you, but I have to tell you a joke. And it's a true story, but it's related to the Tenants' Bill of Rights. And you guys call it I call it the Tenants' Bill of Rights. A quick story, though. So in those days, back in the 80s, well, it's not that different today, but you know, the machine kind of ruled everything. There was a guy named Fred Rohde. Some of you remember that name? Yeah. Fred Rohde was a first ward alderman, which is important when you're part of the machine because you have to pay attention, because however number one voted, that's how you voted, if you were part of that group, which about 45 of the 50 were. That morning, before a city council meeting, I happened to be talking with Fred, because he was who had to fight the entire way for the tenants bill. And in that conversation that morning, Fred said to me that his wife's maiden name was the same as mine, or thought nothing of it. Later at the city council meeting, a couple hours later, I was speaking, and whenever we independent types would speak, they'd stand in the corner, Mel, Burke, Rohde, making lots of noise, trying to distract the press, you know, whatever you say. But you know, when you're in politics a long time, you think nothing of it. But at that moment, for whatever reason, I paused and looked over to the gang making lots of noise and said, well, you can see, even though Fred's wife is married to an or, hasn't done me any good, thought nothing of it, sat down, and immediately, I'm way over here actually, the press, 20 of them, 25, they run or walk fast from their little seats, shove a bunch of microphones in my face and ask, did you just call Fred's wife a whore? I can tell the story now because Fred is dead. He went to... Fred was a mobster. He was a crooked son of a... And Fred went to jail for fixing some really serious cases. He and his buddy, Diarco, and others, and I hope they're not listening. But all day long, I kept getting the notices. Or the cement truck's out front for you. Okay, so it's only relevant because those of us who are around, I mean, there's so many heroes. So today, but at that time, there were so many heroes. Bill Weiland, mentioned Bill Weiland and Hank Rose, and so many others. Herb Ziegeldorf has been fighting these battles with us and forming the Rogers Park Tenants Committee way back in the mid-70s. So lots of heroes. Anyway, so that story is relevant because we had to fight Rohde all the way. And I didn't like fighting a mobster, but overall work. So real quick, I'm going to do 4 things if I have time. Number 1, talk about what we faced, and Jack has cleared the way for that. What we faced way back in 1979, which that's very ancient history for a lot of you. Secondly, then what was our strategy? What did we try to do? 3, why did we win? In this case, meaning the tenants bill, and maybe a couple comments from an old guy about today, and I'm not as active, of course, in the housing area as you all are. Okay, so what did we face? Jack gave you a little bit of a scene. Okay, so I'm elected in 1979. First time we beat the machine in Rogers Park. Okay, the biggest single issue, wasn't a single issue, but the biggest issue we faced was housing. Okay, a lot of things were happening then. The condo movement was sweeping Rogers Park, which means lots and lots of seniors being forced out of their apartments where they've lived for all their lives and looking for a place to go, and there's no protections. Very rapidly rising rents. Okay, in fact, one of our strategies, because sometimes you have to go for things you can't get. Before the Tenants Committee, we proposed a fair rent commission, and that scared the living hell out of them, which was part of the goal. So you had this enormous problem in a neighborhood with 86% rental at the time. Again, you had a lot of great landlords, but it doesn't take a lot of bad ones. 45-unit buildings, 60-unit buildings. So we had our share of really scuzzballs. Okay, so you had that problem, and then you had one other important political problem to remember, at least for me, because I was elected in February '79, took office in April. Sorry? Oh, the snow, yes. Well, we got rid of Belandic because of the snow. Anyway, yes, it was a wild snow time. I forgot what I was going to say, but so as we faced all these things, that the political part I just want to mention to you is that it was also the time when the control decision was settled. Now keep in mind, Chicago's always been extremely discriminatory in its housing, and race has always been the #1 issue in Chicago, it still is today. So at that time, Byrne, because she was new, elected in 1979, settled the control decision, which meant they're going to start building public housing, which was also a dangerous code word for some people. So Jane Burns, the mayor, the 49th Ward Committee was a guy named Mike Brady, who's the second he's deputy chief and staff. So he's the second in command of the city. So they settled the control decision, and they tried to blame every single subsidized unit in Rogers Park on yours truly. And so some of the work that Jack and the others we did, which is really important and we can't really talk about tonight, was to fight that battle successfully, I would say. So the result was people realized it wasn't subsidized units that were destroying the neighborhood, quote. It was bad landlords who may rent to people who weren't doing a good job. That's a much longer story, but so that's what we faced. Our strategies, the long term was to have legislative. We did a lot of other things, a lot of housing court reforms and so forth, but the fundamental thing was the Tenants' Bill of Rights. Just want to mention, so you understand the short-term things like Jack and these wonderful lawyers and what we call the Lawyers Committee for Better Housing. The situation was then, as Jack mentioned, housing court sucked, okay? Is either inefficient or corrupt, in many cases both. We kept discovering bailiffs were taking money from the landlords and all sorts of stuff. So we tried to go to court. It was way beyond our ability, okay? Because remember, and you discussed it, if housing court didn't function, what other right did a tenant have? Now, fortunately, good landlords took care of things. It was a bad landlord, and you're an old lady, and your window was broken in the middle of winter, what do you do? The refrigerator is broken, what do? You can go to housing court and maybe get resolution in 6 months, if you're lucky. Okay, that literally was the problem. And we had our share of the bad landlords. And so the genius, in a sense, of the Tenants' Bill was just a self-correcting, as you know, a self-correcting mechanism, okay? But it's important to understand we were trying to fight these battles, service tenants at the same time organized, because with Jack and others, we'd formed the Rogers Park Tenants Committee with a famous woman named Toby Prince at the time, because we fought these issues, before I was elected alderman, and then that's a big part of what I tried to do the first few years. So by having Jack and Jack Doppold and Sheldon Zenner and Matt and Barbara and all these people, all of a sudden these lawyers could go to court. And all of a sudden judges would have to pay attention because they didn't before. The tenants would go in there, they'd kick them out basically or mistreat them. They'd give these scumbags another 6 months before they have to come back to court. So it was totally ineffective. So I mean, it was a wonderful necessity is the mother of invention, right? So that's what it was. And these guys did a great job, and it really helped us. The other long-term strategy was to build community clout to replace the traditional political clout. And part of community clout was successful legislation. So with the help of lawyers and other people, we came up with actually a fairly moderate ordinance. Other people had around the country, it was not radical at all, at least we didn't think so. So we started fighting for that. We actually fought for it before Harold Washington was elected, but of course it died. Remember, all legislation dies when you end a term, so when Jane Burns' term was over. And Jane Burns was big real estate, so they crushed us. We didn't have a chance. So again, we fought for it for many years. And again, the genius, or whatever, the key part of it was self-correcting, a mechanism so that the worst of the landlords would have no choice but to fix the property or face the possibility of repair and deduct and or withholding rent. And they didn't want to have you withhold rent, and they didn't want you messing with their stuff. So, at least in many cases, that gave us an answer to this, century-old problem. Quickly, okay, so why did we win, okay, in that long, many-year struggle? Number one, because the genesis of the idea was carefully thought out. It was actually moderate, even though the realtors thought it was radical. Secondly, an enormous amount of organizing went on. The existing groups at Lakeview and Hyde Park, of course Rogers Park, Austin, many great people doing things. The organizing helped. You take someone like Bernie Stone, the 50th Ward alderman. He was a realtor. He hated this. He sat next to me. We fought, literally fought. He knocked me down once, by accident, but he knocked me down. A lot of good stories in these days, guys. Okay, so Bernie Stone hated this ordinance. What did the tenants in the 50th Ward do? They organized, they put out thousands of flyers for Facebook, thousands of flyers. What those flyers say, they took all the money that Bernie had gotten from real estate just in the last couple of years and said, why won't he represent the 75% of his neighborhood that are renters? He got so angry at me and then he said, oh, I mean, I can't tell you what he said. But when the vote came up, how did he vote? He voted in favor. He may be a jerk, but he wasn't a fool. Okay, so in other words, that pressure was enormous. Third, the old machine, the insiders, the Mel's and the Burks and all these people, they overdid it. They insulted the seniors that we brought forward. They insulted the old ladies who were, had these problems and came to these hearings over and over again. And they'd stall you. They have a committee, then they have a subcommittee, then they have a sub-subcommittee. Knowing all that would stall you and wear out your energy. But they overdid it, which helped us get enormous support from the press, which is not easy to do, particularly against Chicago, king of real estate. And finally, and perhaps most important, of course, the help of Harold Washington. We never would have got it close with Jane Byrne. So for a number of factors, we were successful. A lot of heroes, a lot of people to appreciate. Many of you that are younger and the lawyers that have kept up this organization, you have to deal with the day-to-day stuff. MTO, John is here, you got to deal with the day-to-day problems. Finally, let me just say, in looking at today, the key to any successful attempt to deal with these kind of problems, one has to do with the efficiency and the decency of those organizations that do it. So in this case, you're still back to housing court and the building department and all sorts of other things. And I can't tell you as much. I think in some ways it's better, but it's not that much better. There's still not a lot of sympathy out there, okay? But that's critical. If you don't have efficiency, it's hard to do the things that are needed to even maintain the status quo. The thing that's different in some ways harder today, and that is the enormous growth of inequality in housing. And tale of two cities and the enormous amount of resources spent in certain neighborhoods, and particularly downtown, and of course the destruction of tens of thousands of CHA units, driving many thousands of poor, largely black tenants out of the city, to a great extent to the southern suburbs, where it's much worse than Cabrera Green ever was. Those conditions make it hard. Now the challenges are there, and you know some of those challenges. How do we have linked development? How do we make the developers that are making incredible amounts of profit, how do we help them to link up, the ones that want to help or even the ones that don't, to take some of that profit from the housing development to help affordable housing? It's a really tough fight. I don't believe this administration has done, of course, what it should, but the notion of inequality touches everything that we have to face in the housing market, along with, of course, race. As I said earlier, race is the number one thing. So my hats are off to all of you. I'm off running elections and doing other things nowadays, but I follow this stuff and I talk to some of the activists now and then. I think you're doing a great job. You're doing a great service. People need what you do for them, and I'm really glad that I got a chance to visit with you, and even Jack stuff. I'm remembering things that I've totally forgotten. So keep up the great work. I'm really pleased that you invited me. Thank you.